Jesus, a name that echoes down the centuries, full of power, mystery, and controversy. Today, this central figure in human history continues to divide opinion, and people generally fall into one of three groups. The first group categorically states that he existed. The second, more skeptical, says that his existence is possible, but that there is no conclusive evidence for it. The third group vehemently denies that Jesus existed, considering him to be nothing more than a myth. But of these three perspectives, two are wrong, and the truth, as always, is inescapable. What will be revealed here goes far beyond opinions or feelings. There is no room for arguments based on guesswork or personal intuition. It's not about, I think so, or I don't think so. None of that. We're talking about something much more solid, historical analysis. It is through historical analysis that we seek to determine, based on evidence, whether Jesus of Nazareth really walked the earth. And there is nothing more important than objective criteria for establishing whether a historical figure existed or not. These criteria, known as positive historicity, are applied by historians to analyze any historical figure whose existence is debated. Applying them, we arrive at an answer that ends the discussion once and for all about which of the three groups is correct. Did Jesus really exist? Is there no way of knowing? Or is his existence completely ruled out? In the course of this text, you will be led to an unequivocal conclusion. For now, put aside any religious conception or absolute skepticism. The question is not whether Jesus was the Son of God, whether he performed miracles, or even whether he rose from the dead. The focus here is just one question. Did a man called Jesus, described as a preacher and considered the Messiah, live in Palestine around 2,000 years ago? That, my friends, is what we call the question of the historical Jesus. We are not discussing faith, but facts. To answer this question, historians analyze sources using strict criteria. The first of these criteria is multiple origins. This means that, in order to corroborate the existence of a historical figure, it is not enough for it to be mentioned in sources directly related to it, as is the case with the Gospels in the New Testament. These sources, although valuable, have a clear bias. They were written by followers who were interested in validating the existence of Jesus and his actions. For this reason, it is necessary to look for external and independent sources, those that have no commitment to the figure of Jesus or Christianity. The more independent these sources are, the more credible the account will be. And if these sources happen to be hostile to Christianity, the weight of their evidence is even greater, as they would have no reason to support or promote the figure of Jesus. Now you may be wondering, has this first criterion been met? The answer is yes. The existence of Jesus is corroborated by several independent sources besides the Gospels. One of the most important comes from Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian of the 1st century, born in Jerusalem and a member of a priestly family. In his work, Jewish Antiquities, Josephus mentions Jesus twice, one of which is a direct and detailed reference. Josephus was not a Christian, and therefore had no reason to validate Jesus' existence out of religious interest. Nevertheless, he recorded information that points to the existence of a man called Jesus, who was seen as the Messiah by some, and whose execution was ordered by Pontius Pilate. These accounts, coming from a historian who had no relationship with Jesus' followers, represent a powerful testimony supporting his existence. Flavius Josephus offers us a valuable piece of this historical puzzle, but there is still much more to be explored. If you feel the time has come to dig deep and uncover truths that have been kept in the shadows, you're in the right place. The forbidden name of Jesus is a unique guide that reveals hidden and surprising aspects of this enigmatic figure. As a special gift, we've made this transformative knowledge available to you. Check it out in the first fixed comment and discover a new dimension of what you've never been told. The first mention of Jesus by Flavius Josephus appears in the famous Testimonium Flavianum, a widely discussed passage that was partly redacted later by Christians. However, even with these alterations, there is an academic consensus that the original core of the text is authentic. A version preserved in the work of Agapius of Hierapolis provides us with a clearer, unhampered view. Agapius describes, "At that time, a wise man called Jesus appeared. His conduct was good, and he was known for his virtue. Many people among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, but those who became his disciples did not abandon his teachings. They reported that he appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive." This account is widely accepted as a genuine description by Josephus of Jesus, reinforcing the historical existence of this man. The second mention by Josephus is in the Jewish antiquities and is even more reliable, being considered totally authentic by scholars. In this passage, Josephus recounts the condemnation of James, identifying him as Jesus' brother. He writes, "Ananus assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, called the Messiah, whose name was James, along with some others, and having accused them of breaking the law, handed them over to be stoned." This reference carries significant weight because it doesn't focus directly on Jesus, but on James. However, by identifying James as Jesus' brother, Josephus establishes that the figure of Jesus was widely known and recognized at the time. His notoriety was such that it was enough to refer to James as the brother of Jesus, called the Messiah, for his contemporaries to understand who he was. This identification reinforces that Jesus was a public and notorious figure. Another testimony of Jewish origin is found in the Babylonian Talmud, a collection of rabbinical teachings compiled from the 2nd century onwards. Despite its hostility towards Jesus, the indirect references to his existence make the testimony even more reliable. In Sanhedrin 43a we read, "On the eve of Passover, Jesus was hanged. For 40 days before the execution, a herald testified, 'He will be stoned because he practiced sorcery and deceived Israel into going astray.' Whoever can say something in his defense, let him come and plead for him. But since no one came forward to defend him, he was hanged on the eve of Passover." Here, Jesus is described in a negative light, as a deceiver and practitioner of witchcraft. However, the account confirms not only his existence, but also his execution in a specific context. Moving on to Roman sources, we find Publius Cornelius Tacitus, widely recognized as one of the greatest historians of ancient Rome. He mentions Jesus in an account of the persecution of Christians during Nero's rule, after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Tacitus writes, "Nero put the blame for the burning of Rome on a group known as Christians, hated for their abominations. The origin of this name comes from Christ, who was executed during the reign of Tiberius by the procurator Pontius Pilate. Although this movement was momentarily suppressed, it resurfaced, not only in Judea, where it originated, but also in Rome. This testimony is particularly valuable because it is independent of Christian sources. It provides crucial details, such as the execution of Jesus under Pilate, as well as highlighting the initial growth of Christianity, even in the face of persecution. The importance of this account becomes even more evident when we consider the historical context. The events associated with Jesus took place in a remote region of little relevance to the Roman Empire, involving humble people outside the important political or military circles of the time. It is therefore understandable that few contemporary references have survived. However, the growing impact of Christianity has forced historians to recognize, years later, the events that marked this figure and his followers. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Units of the forbidden name of Jesus are selling out fast. Take advantage of it now and guarantee access to this unique revelation. Another Roman historian, Suetonius, also makes an indirect mention of Jesus in his work, The Lives of the 12 Caesars. He writes, Claudius expelled from Rome the Jews who, instigated by Christ, caused constant disturbances. This reference, although brief, confirms the existence of religious conflicts related to the followers of Christ during the first century, placing Jesus in the correct historical context. Later, Pliny the Younger, governor of the Roman province of Bithynia, also refers to Christians in a letter to the Emperor Trajan. He describes their practices and seeks guidance on how to deal with them. Although his mention is not directly about Jesus, it highlights the presence of a community of followers that continued to grow decades after the crucifixion. In his letter to the Emperor Trajan, Pliny the Younger describes the behavior of the Christians, pointing out, they used to meet on a specific day before dawn and sing hymns to Christ as a god, and they swore not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery. This account is significant because it reveals that Christians not only venerated Jesus as a historical figure, but also as a divine entity. Pliny, a Roman governor who was not a Christian, thus provides an external testimony that confirms the perception of Jesus by his followers and highlights the lasting influence of his teachings. Another interesting testimony comes from Mara bar Serapion, a Stoic philosopher who, in a letter to his son, mentions Jesus indirectly. He writes, "What did the Jews gain by killing their wise king? Their kingdom was destroyed after that. God justly avenged these 3 wise kings. The Athenians died of hunger after killing Socrates. The island of Samos was flooded after the burning of Pythagoras, and the Jews were expelled from their kingdom after executing their wise king." There is no doubt that the wise king mentioned by Mara bar Serapion is Jesus. Although the reference is not direct, it connects the figure of Jesus to historical events of collective punishment, reinforcing their existence and impact. These independent testimonies are extremely relevant because they come from authors who were not Christians and were often hostile to Christianity. These sources corroborate essential aspects: the existence of Jesus, his execution under Pontius Pilate, the continuity of his followers, and his influence in both Judea and Rome. This information is valuable because it shows that Jesus was well known enough to be mentioned in non-religious contexts. Moving on, we explore a fundamental method in historical analysis: the criterion of shame. This is a lesser-known but crucial concept in historicity. It suggests that the more perfection attributed to a historical figure, the less reliable the testimony. On the other hand, if sources talk about something embarrassing or uncomfortable, the weight of the evidence increases considerably, as it is unlikely that anyone would invent such information without a compelling motive. This criterion applies widely in the case of Jesus. A clear example is his crucifixion, a humiliating method of execution reserved for criminals and rebels in the Roman world. The mere mention of this punishment lends credibility to the accounts because, if crucifixion were an invention, it would be highly unlikely that his followers would choose such a degrading method to describe their leader's death. It would be more logical for them to soften or replace this information with something more socially acceptable. However, the crucifixion is mentioned not only in the Gospels, but also in external sources such as Tacitus and Josephus, confirming its authenticity. In addition, the Gospels record other details that meet the criterion of shame. For example, one of Jesus' disciples, Matthew, is described as a tax collector, an extremely unpopular and despised profession at the time. There would be no reason to include this information if it wasn't true, as it only reinforced the social contempt that this group faced. This kind of embarrassing detail confirms that the narratives about Jesus were not just idealized propaganda, but accounts rooted in reality. Your moment to discover the truth has arrived. The forbidden name of Jesus is available, but there are only a few units left. Don't miss the chance to get your hands on this knowledge. Another point that reinforces its historicity is the fact that even writings hostile to Christianity, such as those found in the Babylonian Talmud, mention Jesus. These descriptions, although derogatory, refer to him as a troublemaker, sorcerer, and deceiver, reinforcing his existence and the impact he had at the time. These testimonies do not deny his existence. On the contrary, they conclusively confirm it, albeit in a negative way. The third criterion for historical analysis is coherence. The aim here is to check whether the accounts of Jesus are in line with the historical context of the time. A clear example is the crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. This method of execution is consistent with what we know about the Roman Empire and its practice of punishing crimes considered serious, such as sedition. Tacitus and Josephus corroborate this event, confirming that it fits into the historical context of the 1st century. Another example of coherence is the portrayal of the disputes between Jesus and the Pharisees, widely described in the Gospels. These conflicts reflect common theological debates in Judaism at the time, also documented in texts such as the Talmud. The description of Judea in the 1st century as a region marked by political and religious tensions also strengthens the accounts. In addition, the idea of Jesus being seen as the Messiah corresponds to the popular belief in charismatic figures capable of performing miracles, something common in the imagination of that time. Finally, the criterion of academic consensus is one of the most powerful tools for determining the existence of historical figures, and in the case of Jesus of Nazareth, the verdict is clear. The vast majority of historians, whether secular or religious, agree that Jesus was a real historical figure. Although there are debates about the details of his life, such as whether he had siblings, whether he was married, or even the exact age at which he died, these discussions reinforce one essential point. There is no significant doubt about his existence. The answer to the question that many ask, whether Jesus of Nazareth existed, does not require any emotional involvement or faith. It's not a question of belief, but of historical evidence. And the answer, backed up by centuries of study and analysis, is a resounding yes. Jesus existed. The historical Jesus, the man called the Messiah by some, who lived in Judea and was condemned to execution under the rule of Pontius Pilate, is as real as any other figure recorded in history. The facts about his life, such as the initial repression faced by his followers, who nevertheless resurfaced and spread rapidly, are also undeniable. This social phenomenon, documented by external and independent sources, points to the immense impact he had, even in a context of persecution. It is impossible to ignore the fact that for someone who lived in a peripheral region of the Roman Empire and without any position of political or military power, Jesus achieved an incomparable level of influence. Now, here's an important point to think about. It's common for some people, in their rush to assert intellectual superiority, to say something like, "Of course he existed, but that doesn't mean he was the Son of God or performed miracles." This line of thinking, while valid for separating faith from historical analysis, ignores a crucial aspect of the history of science and human knowledge itself. What seems impossible today can be understood as possible tomorrow. A secret hidden for centuries could change your outlook forever. Get your copy of The Forbidden Name of Jesus now, before the last units run out. Consider how concepts that once seemed absurd, such as the idea that the Earth orbits the Sun, were widely rejected and even ridiculed in their time. Thinkers were persecuted, condemned and killed for stating what is now irrefutable scientific fact. The same could be said about the deeds attributed to Jesus. What is considered impossible today, such as walking on water or raising the dead, may one day be explained in ways we don't yet understand. This warning is more than a call to reflection. It is a reminder not to judge too quickly what we cannot explain. The progress of science and human knowledge has shown time and time again that what we today call a miracle may in the future be understood as a manifestation of natural laws that we still don't know about. Magnetism, electricity, gravity, all these phenomena were once seen as mysterious or magical before they were explained. So don't dismiss what millions of people around the world believe on the basis of faith. If today it is a historical consensus that Jesus existed, tomorrow perhaps we will be discussing the miraculous events attributed to him with the same scientific certainty with which we treat the foundations of physics today. And for those who remain skeptical, a warning. History has a habit of turning disbelief into certainty. Don't rush to ridicule what you don't yet understand. After all, what you consider impossible today may become reality before your very eyes. In the meantime, the truth remains. Jesus of Nazareth existed, and for many, he not only existed but continues to exist in a very real way. If you enjoyed the content and would like to support our work so that we can continue to bring you more in-depth research and analysis, please consider making a donation of $100. This contribution directly helps the channel grow and produce even richer material. Thank you very much for your support.